friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with Us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn and Courtney Staples. On today's episode, longtime patron Commissar Whiskers comes at us with yet another prompt full of all sorts of apocalyptic visions. But maybe the apocalypse didn't happen? But before we get into that prompt, Courtney, I believe you have a shout out from the Discord.
Yes, I wanted to give a shout out to Ian from Under Common Taste, who brought up an awesome idea in our Discord about the Web of Thousand Threads episode 157 with the space psychics and all of that. His idea is the people who develop psychic abilities are people whose lives are created or preserved as a result of a paradox generated by affecting the past. For example, if a tachyonic phone call stops a psychic from killing someone, the now non-victim would generate psychic abilities because they weren't supposed to keep living. So unwittingly, the bureau that is trying to combat the psychics are inadvertently creating more psychics. And I just love that idea. I think it's really cool. Creates another interesting little facet of that setting. So thank you, Ian. That was awesome.
Absolutely. Definitely want to shout out Ian for that one as well. Friend of the show, by the way. And if you want to involve yourself in cool conversations that came about from, ideas like Ian's, or if you have your own cool idea that you'd like to float our way, you can always go to our Discord, join our Discord, come chat with us, and that's where we'll be. Of course, if you want us to build your own world, if you have your own setting, you can go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com. Click on the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. You can follow us on social media at Let's Worldbuild. And if you're feeling particularly generous, or if you just want access to our sweet, sweet patron-only episodes, or the patron-only Discord room that we have, go to our Patreon. Give us money. That'd be cool if you did, but you don't have to. It's fine. Anyway, that's enough of the shilling. Let's get back to the show because that's what we're all here for. Our prompt this week comes from Commissar Whiskers' longtime patron and many-time setting suggester. This time, their prompt sounds like this. The world should have ended. Well, maybe it did, but we rebuilt it. The apocalypse was coming or was in the middle of happening, but humanity managed to save the day. Either way, this is a second chance. But the old generation is lost, and the next generation will thrive. Is this a forced evolution or some sort of immunity to whatever the problem was? That's the setting start. Now we've got the tenets. Number 1, no monocultures, no federation or Earth government. Number 2, maybe some deniers who don't believe there ever was a near, in parentheses, apocalypse, that this is how it always was. And number 3, less grimdark, more solarpunk, but a little grimdark is okay. So with that all out of the way, let's get right into it. Now, Courtney, I normally make Daniel start us off, so you're going to take care of it this time. What is your first tenet? How are we starting this off today?
All right. Mine is that underwater environments play a key role in the setting, which I think we can kind of take in a lot of different directions based on what you guys have for tenets.
I would certainly agree with that. I mean, we're under the sea. I mean, we could be like Kevin Costner from Ocean. What is it? SeaWorld? No, Ocean World. Waterworld. There we go. Okay. Yeah, we might be drinking our own piss. Who knows?
I loved that movie as a kid, by the way.
That is, I mean, sure, go for it.
Waterworld.
Waterworld, yeah.
Really? What made you love Waterworld? I'm just curious.
I'm also kind of curious, so I'm willing to float this for a little bit. Yeah, what do we got?
Yeah, probably the fact that I was like 10 when I saw it for the first time. I'm sure that played a role in me enjoying it. No, I obviously have always been into like post-apocalyptic settings and stuff of that sort. So I don't know. It just clicked for me for whatever reason.
So it was that and like Dragonheart back to back for you, like double feature all the time type
Oh
thing.
yeah, totally, 100%.
Yeah. That's an Aphid Lounge reference that only our patrons are going to get. Anyway, so I do appreciate the fact that underwater environments have a crucial role to play here. And I like the fact that you didn't force us to have gills or anything like that. You know, like I like the concept that it's open, that we could be, you know, on pontoon boats or we could be at the bottom of the ocean. Maybe Daniel can tell us where we're going to be or how we've changed since the near apocalypse. Daniel, hit us with one of your tenets, why don't you?
My tenet is to establish that whatever this problem or event that happened that made this split between a new generation and an old one was objectively not an apocalypse.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's fun. So the apocalypse or near apocalypse happened, but the cause of this split was not because of the apocalypse or was not an apocalypse in and of itself, correct?
No, the thing that happened was not an apocalypse.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And objectively, so not a matter of perspective here.
Okay.
All right. Sure.
Interesting.
How do we go with that in terms of like what we're working with here? What did you envision with this tenet exactly, Daniel?
I can imagine that the new generation, because they said that the new generation isn't really certain about what the old generation was like necessarily. There's some uncertainty in the prompt. And it's possible that maybe they view what happened as apocalyptic, but it actually wasn't.
Okay. I understand.
So like the current generation thinks that there was an apocalypse, but there just wasn't at all.
Understood.
Exactly. There was some event, maybe it was transformative or something, but I don't want it to be. In order to get us to not create another apocalypse episode, there was an apocalypse. So there you go.
Gotcha. Okay. So
cool.
You're more interested in this idea that the apocalypse was perhaps cultural or just perceived as an apocalypse, correct?
Yeah. So that could be one way to handle it. Yeah.
Great. Okay. And I think that might work out with one of my tenets. Because I really wanted to go a little bit strange with it. And maybe strange isn't necessarily the best way to phrase this. But so my tenet was the new generation has changed so much that they can't recognize their ancestors anymore, even though it only just happened. And when I say recognize, I mean they might not be able to perceive that their ancestors are in fact ancestors. Because the change was, in my mind, I see it as so dramatic or so radical. And I don't mean it could necessarily be a physiological thing, like there is a mutation or they change physically, but their perception could have changed or altered to the point where they literally can't see the dimension on which humans existed at anymore, you know? I wanted to toss that out there as like vagaries into vagaries.
So I wanted to make a joke about like, they do have gills now. They're like fish people under the ocean. But then you said the word radical, which got me thinking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So I think maybe that direction is where I want to go. So
you'd rather go mutants rather than the perception of like different physical planes of existence and stuff like that. Okay, I can respect that. Daniel, what do you think? How are we approaching this?
I like that that's vague. I think it's very flexible. I mean, I think it will be, in terms of plot, easier to do something physical, right? But in terms of theme, it might be more difficult because then we got to like make it mean something more interesting. And if we go the other route where it's like not physical, then the plot part becomes more difficult, right? So it's the inverse problem. But I think either can work, and I am attracted to both.
I'm also curious to see where the other tenets kind of take us. And Courtney, I don't want to downplay your attempt to fit in the radical Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles here, especially as someone who spent a ton of time and money on the plastic figures as a child.
Which one was your favorite, Rob?
I mean, it really did switch, but strangely, it was often Leonardo or Donatello. I was never a big fan of Mikey. I was never a big fan of Raph. Like,
yeah, me neither.
Like Raph especially is like, man, you're just a fucking dumbass, man. You're just getting in trouble all the time. Like, and now this is where Courtney tells me that Raph is her favorite. Go ahead, Courtney.
No, I feel like some sort of heretic for this, but I like barely remember their personalities at all. So whenever anybody's like, "Oh, what's your favorite?" It's like I don't even know, because I know I watched the cartoon a little bit as a kid. I just do not remember them and their personalities at all whatsoever.
It wasn't just the cartoon for me. It was also the live action movies, which I was a huge fan of, you know? So like,
I liked April. That was a figurine I most prized.
Of course you liked April, Daniel. Like, come on. Like, here's the split of 90s children, right? You either had your sexual awakening with April O'Neil.
I was not sexually attracted to April O'Neil.
Or
she's like hardly even attractive.
Or Merva Minx from the Animaniacs. It was one or the other. And it sounds like Daniel came down for the
no sex appeal whatsoever. It's kind of like
you cannot tell me you didn't look at that banana yellow jumpsuit and you're like, hell yeah, I want to see what's under that.
Like, for example, there's a lot of almost like female adventurers that I liked. Like Carmen Sandiego was one.
Carmen Sandiego was great. Yes, that's fair.
Gargoyles the Cop. I thought she was really cool.
Yeah. I thought you were going to go Monster Girl, and you were going
I loved Demona. But, yeah, exactly. But I mean, like the Cop, I liked her because they were these characters who were kind of like almost like, I don't want to say Tomb Raider because Tomb Raider is just kind of blech, but I mean the new Tomb Raider is kind of cool. But in that same vibe, you know, like they're getting shit done. I was kind of into that. But not, it wasn't a sexual.
So you like strong, powerful women.
I mean,
in very brightly colored outfits.
Yeah, but that sounds shitty. You know what I mean? Like, this was the 90s, and it's like I don't really remember anything that April O'Neil accomplished in the show. She probably was just some bumbling damsel, for all I remember. But for some reason, I like them. Like She-Ra was another one. I don't know.
The new She-Ra series gets a lot of flack, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun.
I need to see that.
It's Daniel, I feel like you'll hate it, but there's also a good chance that nostalgia wins out for you. So I'd recommend it. I want to see where you go with it.
I don't want to reduce it to they were strong females because I'm like, I feel like that's such a cheap way for me to say it. So I'm not going to say that. I don't know what it is.
Well, I just said it for you. So
yeah, it was
you
good
can
to say it.
Yeah. You can say it without me getting in trouble. So that's fine.
So Courtney, what was your sexual experience like in the 90s growing up in the cartoon era?
So moving on, my next tenet.
Thank you. I'm glad that you picked up on that. Yeah. Continue on.
My next tenet is that cloning is necessary for the continuation of the species for the time being.
Oh, interesting. That really implies like some kind of mutagenic state or like some kind of like this new species of humanity is like physically incapable of breeding anymore or something like that, which is kind of dire.
Yeah, like it could go in the children of men direction where everybody's infertile, but I think that we could also do like a more, not necessarily upbeat, but a more creative sci-fi interpretation of that.
I mean, it could be that they are a different species that can't breed. Like, you know, you have like what is the type of animals that are, if you breed two of them together, the offspring can't breed.
Right.
Yeah, like a liger, for example, right?
Or mules, I think, or
mules.
Yeah, because mules are mixes between horses and donkeys, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. All right. Maybe a way that we can kind of take this and make it a little bit brighter and a little bit more optimistic is kind of consider this idea that when you decide to create a life, maybe you have more of an option to like kind of mold that future offspring and like really choose what kind of virtues you wish to instill upon it, you know?
So it's like a design your child type of genetic creation.
Maybe like I want it to be less Gattaca,
and
more like you get to like really shape the future of, your species by offering it, like I wish to instill these ideals within it. And so like, maybe it's this kind of thing where the offspring comes out and it's already like mostly formed as like a being, like where it's almost an adult already, you know, that kind of thing. But
could you flip it? Could we flip the scenario? So we said the old generation is mutated or whatever. What if we flipped it where it's the new generation of the mutants, and that's why they can't breathe, that they clone themselves?
well, no, I didn't assume that the old generation were mutants. I assumed that the new generation were mutants.
Oh yeah, that's what I was.
Oh, okay,
thinking.
great. Well, then we're all on the same page.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
but if they're
good.
mutants, that would make sense. That's why they
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. That's what
they
we
were
saying.
created.
Yeah. All right. Daniel, did you give us your second tenet yet?
I know.
Okay, excellent. Hit us with that second tenet. Let's see where we're going with this.
It's very simple. So some members of the new generation seek out the old for evidence of the event occurring or to solve some present problem.
That's interesting. That especially because with my tenet, that makes it a lot harder for them to recognize the old generation, you know, where they literally can't recognize their ancestors or they can't perceive their ancestors anymore. Like that makes it so like these quests that, you know, Daniel is suggesting are perhaps more mundane than they perceive them to be, you know?
I mean, they could also be like conspiracy theorists that nobody believes because people don't even recognize, if they can't recognize the previous generation, maybe they don't believe it even exists, you know?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing as well to kind of take it there.
Yeah, like maybe, is it that the previous generation just looks so different, or is it that they are no longer in their previous state at all? Like they've become, I don't know, beings in vats of goo, or their AI essentially now. Their consciousnesses have been like uploaded to something.
That's an interesting kind of perception as well. I you know, in my mind, I had childhood's end at the kind of forefront of my brain while I was thinking about this. And spoilers for a like 50 or wait, 50? Yeah, 50 plus year old book, but essentially humanity ascends to another state of being where they are essentially a collective energy hive mind, you know, like at the end of that book. So it's like, yeah, the humans of old still exist and they can perceive their children as like, oh wow, they've clearly ascended past the need for like flesh and humanity and stuff like that. And that's kind of what I had in mind while I was thinking about this, but I really am just more interested in this idea that like, you know, you might be looking at a direct offspring and not recognize them in any way or something like that, you know, because it's like, there's no way that I can come from that and you can come from that, you know, like that kind of way that I'm kind of approaching it.
I mean, if we're looking for solarpunk in this, I almost want to get away from a virtual reality. So what if, for example, the previous generation, in the sense of ascendance, they became plant life, and the present generation has grown like in some way from the earth, or maybe from some kind of technology that isn't recognizable as part of the earth, and that's why they don't recognize each other.
I love that. That's awesome.
How do we make that real and like even I want to crank that level of dissonance up even more if we can. You know, like
they're literally plant life. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, no,
like,
no. That's well. Are you suggesting that one generation is like tech and the other is plant life, or where are we kind of thinking with that?
In my mind, the visual is there's this landscape. Maybe it's somewhat high tech, but it's full of like plant life. So there's some lushness to this landscape.
Right.
But the current people who we're calling mutants or clones, like they might live in a semi-technological environment, and maybe like their cloning vats are in some way tapping into the earth, but they don't realize what the connection is. Like maybe they're relying on some energy or resource that actually is sourced from the earth and really from the previous generation.
Yeah. I'm picturing like full on like the new generation is literally like plucking offspring from trees that are the old generation in a new like format.
Yeah, like they're seeds almost.
Yeah.
I also can't help but think of the imagery and the symbolism of roots, you know? So it's like there is something like when Daniel says that this new generation is tapping into the old generation, I'm almost thinking that they're literally using a root system in order to power their modern way of living or way of being or something like that.
Or it's a literal family tree.
Yeah.
Well, that's creepy.
Yeah, so something like that could potentially work as well. Yeah. But I also have this image in mind where, you know, you see this, either it's mechanical or it's a plant, and then you follow the root system further down, and then you see it transition over to like fiber optics cables or like literal roots and vice versa. So there's like a literal blend of tech and like plant life as well.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel, what do you think of that?
No, I think that's great. Like, I think it solves a number of issues, because one of them is trying to recognize the other people as being part of you. I think the only question is they shouldn't truly understand how there shouldn't be a clear connection between this root network and their technology. So like, while I like the visual of like plucking a person off of a tree, maybe it's like it is literally that, but their technology somehow has cloaked that fact. You know, like they've forgotten that that's how it actually does it. Like, I'm picturing, like, if you think of, like, I don't know, you're in some cloning facility, right? And you got a bunch of tubes or orbs or whatever, and maybe they're growing off of a metal lattice, and it's kind of fleshy, but it's surrounded by technology and metal stuff. But they don't understand or remember that the way that this is growing is actually because it's attached to something underground, maybe, that is part of the root system, only to keep your tenant intact. Because if they knew that there's a direct connection to the root system, be easier to figure out that they're related. So we've got to hide that to some degree.
Right.
But overall, yeah, I think it's great.
I guess that's why I was picturing as like literal trees, not even like in a laboratory setting, but like literal, like an orchard of beings that you take down.
Oh, so
it would
they've always done it that way, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. I do find that imagery quite appealing as well. Like, you're literally plucking fruit off of a tree and then it grows into a human or something like that, or this new species rather, you know.
We could do that. That would, we could, maybe their society doesn't have like technology as we understand it, and it's always been biological.
Yeah. Exactly.
So they just view the trees as trees, you know.
Interesting.
Maybe not as sentient. That's why they don't think of them as themselves.
Yeah, like they don't connect them to whatever came before, because there's such a major disconnect between that previous generation.
Okay, I gotcha. I'm just gonna toss my tenet out there now because there's no good segue here. But it does, you know, based on what we're kind of creating here, it does kind of, it brings some interesting questions to fore, which is in my tenet. Let's get out of the way. This society is now beyond war. Conflict occurs in different, though perhaps no less violent ways.
I like that. I had actually had like a one that I decided not to do, that was that competition takes place not through traditional combat, but through performances like dance battles. So
sure. Yeah.
I guess we were going on the same wavelength there.
War is sports is a twist on our list for a reason. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, they've like transitioned to like a more peaceful, less violent, potentially way to solve their problems.
Potentially, right? Like I still tossed it in there that like violence is still in there, but like I'm mostly just trying to avoid like gunfights and space lasers and stuff that I find to be like a little tired right now, you know. So I'm more interested in the conflict really arising from something that is perhaps less directly physical. Now, one thing I recognize that we need to go back to, and we have not touched on at all yet. Normally we do this during the recap, but like I want to go back to it now. Courtney's first tenet was the water or like the oceans and the whatever the fuck plays a major part. And I feel like if we're going like plant life and everything like that, then we need to really take that into account as well. Whether these be like birthing oceans or something like that, maybe that's how we kind of approach it. I just want to make sure that we bring attention and focus back to that concept. And then I have a million other questions that I want to ask, but like, let's start there and maybe we can kind of like figure it out a little bit more, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I was picturing potentially with like the whole plucking the fruit of life. Like maybe that comes from underwater, or it's like some sort of seaweed vegetation type stuff that you need to go down into the water to get. Or it could also just be that these beings are now more aquatic in form.
Mm-hmm. I do love the idea of like a kelp bed, and you're like pulling life from these like kelp beds or something like that. That to me is like evocative and strange and kind of interesting.
Yeah. You should watch the Watchmen TV show, by the way, if you haven't yet. It's very good, and there's something kind of like that.
Interesting.
Oh, really? Yeah. I gotta watch it now that you said you explained to me. I didn't realize that the Watchmen show is actually a sequel to Watchmen.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? That changes everything. I thought it was an adaptation. So when I watched like 2 episodes, I'm like, okay, whatever. But I wasn't super into it. But now when you told me that, I'm like, that changes everything.
No, it's really good.
Have you read the original Watchmen, Daniel?
Yes.
Okay.
That's why I like to know that it's a sequel. I'm like, oh wow, what would they do with that?
Yeah.
They do a really good job with it so far. I'm almost done, but
yeah. As long as we're just tossing out recommendations, y'all should really watch Severance, by the way. I'm like 2/3 of the way through the season, and it's a fun kind of portrait about this sci-fi. It seems like someone with budget took one of our settings and like really ran with it and like gave it legs. So, like just want to toss that out there. Go watch Severance. It's very good. The only problem that it is on like Apple TV Plus, which is kind of like it's an annoying thing to acquire. But I'm sure that there's other ways that people can acquire this TV series. But,
hypothetically, yeah.
I mean, I would never advocate for anything that's extra legal, but it is very interesting and worth your time to watch it. I'll put it that way. Anyway, let's get back to these weird kelp bed creature things, shall we?
I like the notion that these seeds are born from the water in some way.
Yeah.
Because if the current civilization lives on above water or on dry land, it could suggest that there's something that happened that either forced the previous generation to grow underwater. Like I'm thinking about the evolution of life, coming out of water, right? Like that was the trajectory in our real world. But I could see us going back if the environment forced us to. So that could be related to what's happening. Although we do establish that it's not apocalypse that forced them to go into the water.
I was wondering like how that played a role. Maybe it's like it wasn't so much an apocalypse was occurring, but that they realized that like the best way to move forward was to return to the ocean.
Like climate change kind of. It's not that there was we already created this problem and that's how we survived it, is possibly evolving our way back into the ocean, which is crazy.
Something like that,
yeah. It makes me think of once again the show that I've been advocating for that I'm very sad now that it's canceled.
Is it Raised by Wolves?
That one.
Okay.
Gotcha. That's a large part of the premise. And I think
what
could work.
Daniel, you just earned yourself a square on the bingo card.
Exactly.
Mark it off on the bingo card, y'alls.
Not until they fucking finish that series, which they never will.
Right. Yeah. Now, Daniel, when you say climate change, you're talking about the thing that doesn't exist and it's a big conspiracy, right? Like that's the thing that we're talking about. Okay.
I mean, it's just things, things were warm in the past. I don't know what the big deal is.
I mean, we're going to have a little ice age again fairly soon.
Oh my God.
Anyway.
Like stop whining, 90 degrees. Come on.
Right?
Like, shouldn't worry about things getting cold. That's not how it works.
Yeah. It still snows in the wintertime, you fucks.
Right.
Yeah, come on. All right. So, okay. I like the idea that humanity, because I mean, at this point, right, the whole kind of conceit is humanity recognizes that it has the power to create its next evolutionary step and then says, all right, how can we do that? And then this is what they come up with, which are these like kelp creatures, or maybe I'm off base here, but I want to stick with the idea that Daniel suggested earlier, where they are literal plants, right? That they're like now, when you say they're literal plants, Daniel, I'm assuming you mean sentient plants as well, correct?
They might be sentient, but I don't think it should be in any way obvious. Like perhaps they're sentient in the way that perhaps a star could be sentient. Like their awareness is so different than ours that we wouldn't think of them as sentient. Like we don't know if plants could be sentient. They don't have the biology for that to be possible as far as we know. We don't understand sentience. So maybe that's the situation for them.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting research about like plant intelligence and plant like community that's going on right now. I'm not getting it into that, but I mean, when you're Daniel, I just want to make clear here. Are you suggesting that the old generation are semi or perhaps not semi sentient plants, or the new generation are plants?
The old
Because
generation.
I feel like I was going to say, if the new generation are plants, that makes the conflict in like storytelling very limited.
I mean, what I'm picturing is like, the ocean's full of this plant life that's creating these seeds, and then people are born from that. But we said that cloning is involved, so I don't know if is the cloning the mechanism what's happening with these seeds, or is it that some people are born and then they clone themselves? How does that work?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards that whatever's being like output from these seeds is essentially clone-based life. Whether that's clones of a single being, or if there was some kind of experimental thing done where like all of humanity was sort of, or the desired traits of humanity were pooled into some sort of organism that this is pulling from.
Okay. I want to shelf that idea, Courtney, because I have an idea, and you know how I am. If I don't say it now, I'm just going to forget it. I'm thinking about Daniel's non-apocalypse tenet. And I'm thinking about this plant life that we have as the old generation. So the old generation chose to turn themselves into plant life because they knew it was the best way forward, and created new life with this new generation. And, maybe to this new generation, they look back and it's this apocalypse where all the old generation are gone and they don't know what happened to them. And it's like this massive apocalypse that happens. In reality, it is the most heroic thing that humanity could have done, which is to offer themselves to become this new kind of like plant life, and then offer the new generation life. They're like, look, we recognize this is the only way. This is the only way forward. Everything is super fucked. This is the most heroic thing that we can do. And obviously there's going to be people who like don't go through with it. But I'm going to say the majority of humanity is like, cool, we're going to turn ourselves into these weird tree or plant things. How does that square?
I think that's a summary of it for sure.
Okay. Yeah. But that works for what we're going with here with your non-apocalypse, right? Like the non-apocalypse that we're talking about, that we're focusing on, is humanity's sacrifice, so to speak, by turning themselves into plant life.
Yeah, they've been transformed. Like we can even leave it uncertain as to why they did that. Our assumption is climate change, but it could be, or I should say, global warming.
Sure.
Since climate change is a propagandist term.
Oh my god.
Is it?
Yes. Climate change was promoted by the right in order to hide the fact that it's global warming.
Yeah, it downplays the effects.
Mm-hmm. See, I thought it was just a more science neutral setting or term for it, but
no,
okay.
it was a tactic.
Keep moving.
But my point is that, like, I think if we don't have to really answer the question of why, because it may have happened like a million years ago for all we know.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's cool. Well, my tenet directly suggests that this was a recent change.
Right.
Toss that out there too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess it could just be like a very rapid process. Like whatever they developed in the past, they were able to push it through in literally like one generation or so.
Okay, that would make sense. Yeah.
The other interesting aspect about that is that it means that there could potentially be some selfish ass humans out there that are like, I never went through with the procedure, and I don't, but they're like ancient and now they're old people and they're, regretting their decisions of not being a hero and stuff like that. Or maybe they're just completely selfish dicks, who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, like that, there is at least there. So before I get into the wrap-ups, I do have some questions. Number one, what's the main conflict that we've got going on here? Because one of Daniel's tenets is that the new generation seeks out the wisdom of the old generation. And I don't know what that looks like or how that looks like or whatever, but I'm curious as to see what is the conflict that would spur that kind of knowledge seeking, because there has to be something that would push someone to go and seek out the old wisdom, right?
Could it be the status quo is the problem? So it seems like almost everyone's a clone, right? So we didn't really iron out. Courtney, you talked a little bit about that, but it seems like for the vast majority of people are clones. Perhaps one of them has discovered something about their own biology that suggests that they aren't supposed to be like this. And that's
Yeah.
the conflict, uncovering that truth.
Yeah, so going back to the idea of like if much of humanity had sort of become this amalgamation of plant matter that is then like giving life to these seed pods that grow up, what if maybe memories of some sort are contained in those, or or if you can do like sort of selective breeding, if you will, of these clone pods, if you like what's the gardening term?
Prune.
Yeah, essentially if you like prune certain traits off of
Splicing.
them and and splice together other things, like you can
Mm-hmm.
maybe even start to replicate more closely what life used to be like.
Oh, I see.
I mean, that's
so it's
kind of
Gattaca
what
situation.
I guess
that's what I was
that's closer
suggesting
to-
earlier. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Where like you have a more direct way of creating the next generation.
Yeah, so I don't think like clone has to be like literally taking like
Right.
Okay.
human A becomes like seed A. It could be like
I see. Okay.
sort of taking traits from them, and also the fact that like maybe that's the only way that the new life can exist is by coming from this plant life. They like can't reproduce on their own for the time being.
It's not a biological reproduction as in like you can impregnate someone. It's like
right.
you kind of got to jizz on a tree branch and then it becomes a human or becomes a
genetic engineering
neo-human.
is what's happening.
Yes.
Right, more engineering.
Because they're not clones. They're just they're clones in the sense that there's a certain set of variety that they're all made from.
Right.
And that must be what the trees produce.
Oh, so the trees are like a genetic soup or a genetic mixture.
Yeah.
And again, going back to that root imagery, like a literal family tree, it absolutely works.
Wait, okay, going back to your first thought about children of men, it's the same. You could borrow from that. Like they are all infertile. Maybe there's a birth, and the birth is the conflict because it shouldn't be possible, and it suggests something new.
Oh, interesting.
Well, that is a very interesting.
That is really
idea.
cool.
Yeah,
I like that a lot.
Like an immaculate conception. Like they probably don't even have sex. That's not a concept, maybe for this species. I don't know. And perhaps like one of them gets pregnant somehow.
Yeah,
you know,
very cool. And yeah, it's like almost a reverse Children of Men, because in that situation, it's like people are desperate to like know why they can't have children, and when there is a new child, it's like this absolute miracle. But then in this situation, it's like, wait, what just happened? Like this isn't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
What's going on?
This shouldn't be. Yeah.
Right.
And you said, Rob, like the conflict isn't violence or war, but it could be a fear of breaking the status quo. Like they wouldn't want that to be a widely known fact, you know?
Right. And maybe that's why they're seeking out the knowledge of the past, because they want to make sure they don't repeat mistakes, or they want to figure out like why this is happening, and like, is this right? Is this going to destroy everything?
Yeah.
Are you suggesting, Courtney, that the main conflict is between historians? Because you know me and my big history boner, like I'm totally down with something like that.
Yeah, that could be interesting. Definitely.
Yeah, it's like the conflict is, let's see, what are the different conflicts? Person, setting, self, and then against another. What are ones? It's one of those. It's one of the less used ones.
Yeah. Again, we're not dipping into postmodernism here, but I just want to acknowledge that it's there and it's viable. But
just looking at this list here, I mean, kind of like society itself, almost. Yeah. Because they don't. I imagine there's within the groups there, like they're not all saints. They may be post-war and they may be like more utopic, but I'm sure like a threat to the whole society can be a danger, and that historical knowledge might be dangerous.
Oh! You're literally talking about pruning again. But on a societal, on a cultural, on an idea level, where you have to prune ideas from society because they are dangerous to the whole.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. I love the consistent imagery that we have here. I love this idea that like life comes from the oceans and then all of a sudden it doesn't, and then that causes everyone to freak out. Okay. That's
I like
very,
that
very
subtitle.
cool.
That's a movie subtitle right there.
Yeah. What, life comes from the oceans until it doesn't?
It doesn't. Yes. Dun, 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 on the poster.
No, that's on a like an 90s
Sharknado.
sci-fi jacket. That's what it is, you know, like with one of the, I just want to take a brief aside here. New sci-fi and fantasy and horror covers all fucking suck. It's all like bespoke, like, font and like 4 colors. It's like, motherfucker, I want to go back to where I see a monster on the cover, fully illustrated, like badass, like really cool looking.
I wish
like,
there was a new renaissance of that. It would be great
I really
to have a
want
pulp
that
renaissance.
back. Yeah,
I feel like I'm a pulp writer and I want to do that, and nobody will publish that. You know,
no one would publish it, Daniel.
No one fucking wants pulp.
That's
and
the
I want
terrible
it.
thing.
You know,
I know I want it too.
Yeah,
like,
it could be like semi woke pulp. You can do that. You know, if you really want it. It's doable.
Yeah, like. Oh, well, in this one, it's, you know, it's like a BIPOC lady who's a killer. And it's like, just have that instead, like with the severed head holding it, whatever.
Just stick it in there. It'll be fine.
I just want cool art back. I don't fucking care about anything else. Like, damn it. Instead of like, oh, look at these 4 colors in one font. And it's like, graphic
our elegant
cool.
font face and our white tech, our white background color.
Like, don't get me wrong. Graphic design, I know Courtney does it. It's cool. It's a cool thing. But
can be something slutty. That's what I'm saying.
Just
I want a slutty book cover. It doesn't have to be like slutty in the sense of like specifically women, but just like something slutty. That's what I mean.
Like it's showing off a bit. Like it's it's not all like buttoned up and like.
I don't think
look at our airbrush.
Slutty, Daniel.
No, that's the word we're going to use now.
That's the word I want.
Overt.
No, I want slutty. Like slutty has the right amount of like letting it hang out, and there's a little bit too much being shown, and it's just not. You know, that's what I'm looking for. That's the word I want.
Okay, I gotcha. So you want to see like a testicle falling out of like the shorts of some horror victim,
like a single
He-Man,
a single testicle.
No, not even like a whole like the quarter, like just like the outline of one poking out. You know, like,
picking a shitty font that's just too big. You know, and the author's name is like 3/4 of the page.
That's where I'll fight you. I still think we should have good font. I think we should have cool and good font.
The silly ones, they're like a graphic unto themselves. That's
this like more decorative, like display font.
Okay,
yeah.
I thought you were about to say like I want fucking wingdings as my.
Oh no,
font.
that's
like,
not a font. That's an atrocity. You know.
I know.
That does have a use. They're glyphs within the font that you can use for different things.
God, Courtney.
Or Comic Sans. I mean, that would be an atrocity.
No,
papyrus.
You get the
fucking
fuck
papyrus.
Out of
well, fucking Avatar. Avatar fucking used papyrus already.
God damn them.
Oh boy, we're getting real far away from this one, y'all.
It's an atrocity.
Okay, we need to bring it back.
Anyway,
you need to bring it back. Let's bang through and do the recap real quick.
Yes.
Number 1, Courtney, you started us off. What was your first tenet?
Underwater environments play a key role in the setting, which I think we've definitely got with the kelp tree clone thing going on now.
Can agree. Life comes from the ocean until it doesn't. There we go. Daniel, what was your first tenet?
It wasn't an apocalypse, which we've covered, I think.
I think that, I feel like we've nailed that with the whole like human generation turning themselves into plants. Like, that seems kind of horrific, but it's also a completely heroic act.
Childhood's end kind of transformation, which is fine.
Yes, sure. My first tenet was the new generation has changed so much that that's pretty obvious. They're literal fucking trees, and then these mutant things are not trees. They're like,
a little different.
You know, we actually really haven't nailed down what these new generations are necessarily.
Yeah. Maybe the twists will help us with that.
That's a great fucking.
They're robots.
Courtney. Yeah, maybe they're or dinosaurs.
They're dinosaurs.
Yeah. we could have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It could still happen. It could still happen. Okay, hold on. All right. Courtney, what was your second tenet?
Cloning is necessary for the species for the time being.
Yep. Comes from the ocean. Absolutely works for me. 100%. Daniel, what was your second tenet?
There's some members seeking out the old generation, and I think that will come into more play when we figure out like factions and plots.
I think that we also kind of buttressed that idea with the conflict, with the main conflict being the birth and like historians kind of seeking out the old ways. I think that works pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of, this is more something that I think we can sprinkle. It's like a mayonnaise. It's like it's going to get spread throughout the entire sandwich, right? Which is my second tenet. The society is now beyond war. Conflict occurs in a different, though perhaps no less violent way. I feel like that's been spread throughout. Like there's no overt conflict that is violent. Correct?
Yeah, it's a good. I think it's a good tenet, especially for this theme.
Right. I mean, it said a little grimdark, so maybe there is a little war, but maybe not, probably not. All right, we've gone through the tenets. We've got the recap. We're on the twist. So we're going to roll the twist, and we're going to come back next week and try and reconcile it. So our twist for next week is when a gift becomes a curse. When a gift becomes a curse.
Nice.
No idea how we're going to square that. That's what next week is for. A big thank you to our longtime patron, Commissar Whiskers. Thank you so much for this prompt. We're very interested and excited to continue on with it next week. Remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com. Click on the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, we're over on Twitter at Let's Worldbuild, where you can follow all of our updates and some shit posts every now and then, whatever. If you're really interested in talking about some cool world building settings or have questions or suggestions like Ian did at the top of the episode about our settings, you can go to our Discord with a link for that in the description of the episode. And of course, if you're feeling particularly generous or just want access to those sweet, sweet patron-only episodes, you can go to our Patreon and give us money. Give us all the money that you can possibly afford or not afford, but actually don't give us money if you can't afford it. That's what this whole thing is about. That's going to do it for this episode of World Build with Us. Remember that we love you very much, and we're going to get through this together. Until next week.